She had everything money could buy, except the one thing she never knew she was missing. The moment a craftsman's careless joke cut straight to her heart, Victoria Sterling's carefully rebuilt life cracked open at the seams. One sentence, 4 words he said laughing. She heard them and stopped breathing. What happens when a woman worth billions discovers that the only thing she truly wants is something no amount of money can purchase? Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if something in these first few minutes already feels familiar, hit that like button before you even know how it ends. The antique store on Lexington Avenue smelled like cedar and old paper, which Logan Mercer had always found inexplicably comforting, the kind of smell that belonged to places that had survived enough decades to stop caring about being fashionable. He was standing in the back of the shop near a shelf crowded with ceramic pitchers and rusted tin lanterns when he spotted it, a cast-iron door knocker shaped like a fox, its tail curled into a perfect ring. Heavy, ugly in the best way, and exactly the kind of thing the front door of the Caldwell house deserved. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, felt the weight of it. "What do you think?" he called across the aisle. Victoria Sterling looked up from a display of pressed glass doorknobs she'd been examining with the focused attention most people reserved for quarterly reports. She had her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. She did that constantly, never seemed to notice, and a faint line between her brows that appeared whenever she was actually thinking rather than performing. About the knocker? About whether a house that's falling apart deserves a fox on its front door. She crossed the aisle, heels clicking softly on the worn plank floor, and took the knocker from him. She held it the way Logan had learned she held most things, decisively, like she was assessing whether it was worth keeping. "It's heavy." "That's the point." "You want something heavy on the door of a house where half the foundation is still being repaired?" "The foundation's solid now," he said. "We finished the east corner yesterday." She looked at the fox again. Something almost like a smile moved across her mouth, there and gone. "It's ridiculous." "Yeah. Get it." Logan set it on the counter near the front where the shop owner, an older man named Pete, who smelled like pipe tobacco and wore suspenders unironically, was ringing up a small oil lamp for a woman and her husband visiting from somewhere out of state. Tourist season in Asheville started early and lasted long. It was the husband who looked at Logan and then at Victoria and said, "The way strangers say things they think are harmless, you two looking for something for your place?" Logan opened his mouth. The obvious response was no. "She's my client. The house is hers. I'm just the contractor." But what came out instead, entirely without planning, was, "She keeps saying the house isn't done yet, so we keep ending up in places like this." "Married long?" the woman asked, smiling at Victoria. And Logan, because he was tired and it was a Tuesday and the easiest answer in the world was right there, said, "Long enough that I know not to argue about door knockers." Pete laughed. The couple laughed. Victoria laughed too, a short, real laugh, the kind that didn't happen often around her in his experience. And then the laughter faded and she said very quietly, almost like she was talking to herself, "I almost wish that weren't a joke." The shop went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something true gets said by accident. Logan looked at her. She was already looking away, attention turned toward a shelf of vintage drawer pulls, her posture perfectly composed, but her jaw was set in the way it set when she was working hard not to show something. Pete finished ringing up the lamp. The couple thanked him and left. Logan paid for the fox knocker and carried it out in a paper bag, and he and Victoria walked back to her Land Rover in the parking lot 2 blocks over without saying much, which was not entirely unusual. They'd had comfortable silences between them before, but this one was different. This one had something in it. He put the bag in his back seat. She started the car. She drove them back toward the house the way she always drove, efficiently and slightly too fast, and neither of them mentioned what she'd said. But Logan Mercer spent the whole 20-minute drive staring out the passenger window at the Blue Ridge foothills, thinking about those 8 words with the concentrated attention of a man who builds things for a living, and therefore understands down in his bones that you can tell a lot about a structure by the single moment it shifts. The Caldwell house sat at the end of a gravel drive off a 2-lane road 7 miles east of downtown Asheville, tucked into a hillside that the old-growth oaks had been slowly reclaiming since the 1940s. It was a 1920s craftsman, 4 bedrooms, wraparound porch, a root cellar that flooded in spring, and a kitchen that had last been updated sometime during the Eisenhower administration. Beautiful bones, brutal condition. Victoria had bought it 8 months ago at an estate auction, cash, no inspection, which Logan had considered either brave or catastrophically impractical before he'd met her, and understood that for Victoria Sterling, those two things were often the same. She'd hired him through a referral from a friend of a friend, which was always how Logan got his better clients. Word of mouth was the only advertising he'd ever trusted. His company was small by design. Himself, 2 skilled carpenters named Ray and Deontay, and a subcontractor network he'd spent a decade building. They didn't do luxury flips, they didn't do fast. They did old houses that deserved to be saved, and they did it right. When he'd first walked through the Caldwell house, this was 9 months ago, before Victoria had even closed on the purchase, he'd spent an hour in there alone, just listening. That was something his mother had taught him. Old houses talk, she used to say. You have to be quiet enough to hear them. This one had plenty to say. The plaster walls told him about decades of shifting humidity. The floor joists told him about the weight of everyone who'd lived here. The kitchen ceiling, stained amber from years of wood smoke, told him the family who'd last lived here had eaten a lot of meals together in that room. He'd found a child's height markings carved into the doorframe of the smallest bedroom, pencil notches going up to about 4'6", with dates beside them, the last one from 1962. He'd taken a photo of that doorframe and sent it to Victoria with no caption. She'd replied, "Save that, whatever it costs." That was the first time he'd thought she might be someone worth knowing. The renovation had been going for 6 months now. Logan was there most weekdays, sometimes Saturdays. Victoria came out every few days, sometimes more often than that, and her visits had shifted over the months from focused walkthroughs, checking progress, asking questions, making decisions, to something less structured. She'd show up with 2 coffees, hand him one without asking how he liked it, because she'd learned by then, and they'd walk the house together. He'd tell her what had been done, what was coming, where they'd hit unexpected problems. She'd ask questions. Good questions, usually. The first time she'd sat down on the porch steps and just stayed there for an hour while he worked nearby, not talking, just existing in the same space, he'd thought it was a little strange. The second time, he'd understood. The house was somewhere she could breathe. That was the part of Victoria Sterling that the business press didn't write about, the part of her that needed quiet. He'd read a few of the articles about her, because you did that when you were working for someone. You looked them up. You learned the context. CEO of Sterling Property Group, one of the more successful mid-sized commercial real estate development firms in the Southeast. Built it from a company her father had left borderline insolvent when he died 6 years ago. Rebuilt the whole thing over 3 years, paid off the debt, turned a profit in year 4. A profile in a business magazine 2 years ago had called her relentlessly disciplined, which Logan suspected was journalist speak for something more complicated. What the articles mentioned less often, because it was personal, and she kept it personal, the marriage. 3 years to a man named Preston Hale, who had also been a property developer, and who had apparently spent most of their marriage being unfaithful in ways creative enough to constitute almost a second career. The divorce had been 18 months ago. The Caldwell house purchase had been 3 months after that. Logan had not asked her about any of it. She hadn't offered. The closest they'd gotten was one evening when she'd said, standing in the gutted kitchen looking at the exposed beams, "I need this place to be something I built, not something someone else picked for me." He'd nodded. He understood that language. But he was 32 years old and had been doing this work since he was 19. He'd grown up in western North Carolina, in a small town 40 minutes from Asheville, third-generation carpenter on his father's side. He'd always been good with his hands in the particular way that some people are simply wired to understand how things fit together. Angles, load-bearing relationships, the way one decision in a structure flows forward into every subsequent decision. His high school shop teacher had once told him that he had spatial intelligence, like it was a clinical condition. Logan had mostly just thought of it as the ability to pay attention. He'd gone into the Army at 21, 2 tours overseas, came back at 25 with a hearing loss in his left ear, a mild and persistent difficulty with crowds, and a renewed appreciation for work that he could see and touch when it was done. He'd started his own company at 27, right around the time everything else in his life was getting complicated. Ellie's mother, Sarah, had not been cruel. That was the thing Logan always wanted to make clear in his own mind, because it felt important not to let the story calcify into something simple. She hadn't been cruel. She had been young and scared and honest, eventually, about the fact that she didn't want the life she'd ended up in. She'd left when Ellie was 2, moved to Portland for reasons that had started as professional and become personal. And Logan had spent the following months understanding that what he'd thought was a marriage was something both of them had been maintaining out of inertia and the specific terror of admitting failure. She called Ellie on birthdays, sometimes more. Ellie, at 8, had constructed a relationship with her mother from those calls that was careful and fond in a contained way. She didn't talk about it much, which Logan sometimes worried about, and mostly chose to respect. What Ellie talked about, what she was full of constantly, was everything else. She was an 8-year-old who treated the entire world as a problem she was solving. She drew maps of things. She cataloged her rock collection in a notebook with handwritten descriptions. She had recently developed a fascination with wood carving after watching Logan work, and had been practicing on small pieces of scrap timber with a beginner's set of chisels he'd gotten her for Christmas. She came to the Caldwell house on Saturdays sometimes, when Logan needed to work and couldn't arrange other coverage, and she would occupy herself in whatever space was safe. She'd taken to sitting on the porch with her carving and her notebook, and she'd taken to Victoria with the uncomplicated directness that children reserve for people they've decided are trustworthy. The first time Ellie had met Victoria had been on a Saturday 6 weeks into the job. Victoria had arrived with coffees and found Ellie cross-legged on the porch, very seriously carving a crooked bird out of a chunk of pine. Victoria had sat down on the steps and said, "What's his name?" Ellie had looked at the bird critically. "I'm not sure he has one yet. He's still becoming something." "That's fair," Victoria had said. "Some things need to finish before you know what they are." Ellie had glanced up at her. "Do you have something that's still becoming?" Victoria had been quiet for a moment. "Yeah," she'd said, "I do." Logan had been standing in the doorway watching that exchange and had felt something in his chest do a complicated thing he hadn't paid much attention to at the time. After the antique store, things were different in a way Logan could feel but couldn't precisely describe. It wasn't that they stopped talking. If anything, they talked more easily than before, which seemed counterintuitive, like the accidental confession had cleared something from the air, some pretense they'd both been maintaining, and left behind just the two of them, which was less complicated and more complicated at the same time. He noticed things more, or stopped pretending he wasn't noticing them. The way she held her coffee cup with both hands, even when it wasn't cold. The fact that she'd started leaving a pair of work boots in the mudroom of the house, practical ones, because she'd realized weeks ago that heels on plaster dust were a bad idea, and she kept forgetting to bring different shoes. The way she'd started referring to decisions about the house in plural, "We should do the porch boards in the original width," not, "I want the porch boards." He noticed that she came to the house more often. He noticed, too, that when she left, the house felt different. He didn't say anything about any of this. He was not a man who talked about things he hadn't worked out yet, and this was something he was nowhere near working out. She was his client. She was a billionaire. She was a woman still raw from a marriage that had cost her more than money. And he was a single father with a small company, a rented house, and a past he'd been quietly managing for years. Those were not problems to be dismissed. He was not in the habit of dismissing problems. But the words she'd said in the antique store sat with him like a splinter, present, slightly uncomfortable, refusing to be forgotten. "I almost wish that weren't a joke." Hulk. It was a Wednesday evening, 3 days after the antique store, and Logan was working late on the library's window trim because the custom-milled casings had finally arrived, and he wanted to start the install before the wood adjusted to the humidity any further. Ray and Deontay had gone home at 5. Logan stayed. He was halfway through the second window when he heard a car in the drive. Victoria came in through the front. The new front door was hung now, solid mahogany with the fox knocker centered at chest height. And she stopped in the doorway of the library and looked at him for a moment before saying anything. "You're still here." Window trim came in. She looked at the work he'd done. She had a good eye, had developed it over the months, and she could see when something was right or off in a way that clients often couldn't. She looked at the corner joint on the first window for a long moment. "That's a tight fit," she said. "Had to take about a 16th off the miter. The corner wasn't quite square." "Is that a problem?" "Not anymore." She sat down on the floor, which she did sometimes, just sat wherever was convenient, and leaned her back against the bookshelf that was still wrapped in moving blankets against the far wall. She had her work bag with her, and she pulled out her laptop and opened it, and Logan understood that she was going to stay for a while and work, which had happened before. They worked in parallel for about an hour. Logan on the windows, Victoria on whatever Victoria worked on at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night. The only sounds were the tools and the occasional soft keyboard clicks, and once, briefly, the sound of something in the back of the house settling. Eventually she said, without looking up, "I've been thinking about what I said in the shop." Logan set down the coping saw, looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She still wasn't looking at him. "I'm saying it anyway because not saying it is making me feel like an idiot." He waited. She closed the laptop, finally looked at him, and her expression was the same one she'd had when she'd picked up the Fox knocker. Assessing. Honest. "I've been very careful," she said, "for a year and a half, about what I let myself want. Very deliberate, very controlled, because the last time I wasn't careful, I trusted someone for 3 years who was running a very good performance the whole time." She paused. "And I'm not saying that to make you feel sorry for me. I'm saying it to explain why I said what I said and why I can't just—" She stopped. "Victoria, don't." She shook her head. "Don't be nice about it. I'm trying to be honest with you, and if you're nice about it, I'll backtrack." He almost smiled. "Okay. I said what I said because I meant it, which I didn't intend to do. And now it's sitting between us, and I don't know what to do with it. And I figured it was better to say that out loud than to pretend I said it because of the ambiance of the antique store." Logan looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his pencil and made a mark on the third window casing, measuring for the next cut, and said, "You know what the hardest thing about old houses is?" She was quiet. "You can see what they were supposed to be. You can see the original plan in the bones. But they've been through so much by the time they get to you that you can't just restore them to the original plan. The original plan doesn't exist anymore. You have to figure out what they're going to be now, accounting for everything that's happened to them." He made a second mark. "That's not a metaphor. I'm just saying, I know what it's like to have something you're not sure how to handle yet." She was quiet for a long moment. "That was a metaphor," she said finally. "Maybe a little." Something released in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the thing that comes just before one. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. She opened her laptop again. He picked up the saw. They didn't say anything else about it, and neither of them addressed what exactly had just been agreed to, because some things don't need to be categorized on the same night they're acknowledged. But the splinter was still there, only now it was something both of them knew about, which made it different. The gossip piece ran on a Thursday morning. Logan found out about it when Ray came in holding his phone with an expression like he'd seen something he wasn't sure how to present, and said, "Hey, did you know you're in an article?" The site was called Asheville Social Scene, which was the kind of local celebrity gossip operation that ran blurry photos of restaurant openings and property records and called it journalism. The headline was, "Sterling's Mystery Renovator, Billionaire CEO's Frequent Companion Spotted." There were 2 photos. One was grainy, taken from across the street, of Logan and Victoria walking out of the antique store. The other was clearer, taken from the road with a long lens, of the 2 of them on the porch of the Caldwell house the previous Saturday, standing close, looking at something on Logan's phone. It had been a photo of a paint color. They'd been looking at a paint color. But in the photo, it looked like something else entirely. The article was about 400 words of speculation dressed up as observation, deploying phrases like close companions, an intimate setting, and raising questions about whether Victoria Sterling, who was described extensively and not inaccurately as a high-profile businesswoman still navigating life after a very public divorce, had moved on with her contractor. Logan read it in the cab of his truck, then put the phone down on the passenger seat. He thought about calling her. Then he thought she probably already knew. Victoria Sterling had people who monitored this kind of thing, or if she didn't, she should. And then he thought that calling felt presumptuous, and then he picked up the phone and called her anyway. She answered on the second ring. "I'm guessing you've seen it," he said. "I've seen it." Her voice was flat in the specific way it got when she was managing something. "Do you need me to?" "No. You don't need to do anything. This is my problem to handle. It's got my name in it. It has contractor in it. Your name is in the third paragraph." "Victoria." A pause. "My communications director is already drafting a response. It'll be brief and it'll make them look foolish. These things go away in 48 hours if you don't feed them. And if we get photographed together again?" Silence. "We're going to get photographed together again," he said. "I'm at your house 6 days a week." "I know that." "So." Another silence. This one had something different in it than the ones before. More complicated topography. "It bothers me," she said finally, "that my first instinct was to make you invisible in the response. To describe you as just the contractor and make it clear there's nothing personal. Because it's not." She stopped, started again. "It would have been the true thing to say 6 months ago. Now it feels like a lie." Logan didn't say anything. "But I also know what this kind of exposure costs," she said. "Not me. I can handle it. But you. Ellie, your business. People Google you, Logan. People who might hire you. And a gossip piece that links you to a billionaire's personal life. Stop. I'm serious." "So am I. Stop." He paused. "I'm a grown man. You don't need to protect me from a 400-word blog post. It's not just one post." "I know it's not. And I don't care." A very long pause. "Why not?" she asked. And Logan sat in his truck in the driveway of the Caldwell house and looked at the front door with the fox knocker on it. He'd installed it yesterday, thought it looked exactly right, and said, "Because some things matter more than whether people think they're a good idea." The silence after that was the longest one yet. "I have to go," she said. "I have a call." "Yeah." "Logan?" "Yeah." "Thank you." She said it like she meant about 15 different things by it. "For the door knocker, too. My communications director sent me a photo from the curb this morning. She said it looks distinguished." "Tell her thank you." "I will." She hung up. Logan sat in the truck for another minute, then got out and went to work. Betten. The porch was nearly done by the end of that week. They'd replaced the rotted boards with Douglas fir, milled to the original width. A detail Victoria had insisted on, and Logan had been glad to fight for, since it was right. The new boards were unfinished yet, still pale and resinous, waiting for the stain that would come last. But the structure was sound, and the surface was level, and you could stand at the railing now and look out at the tree line without worrying about anything beneath your feet. Ellie had claimed the porch as her workspace on Saturdays. She'd moved her carving operation there, setting up a small wooden stool Logan had made for her years ago, and she worked on her bird with a focused intensity that he recognized from his own reflection. The bird was becoming something, not fast, not smooth, but recognizably something. It had wings now that curled toward the body in a way that actually resembled a bird at rest. Victoria had come out that Saturday around noon with sandwiches from a deli downtown, an increasingly common occurrence, and she'd sat on the steps across from Ellie, and they'd eaten together while Logan worked inside on the library trim. He could hear them through the open window. "What kind of bird is he going to be?" Victoria asked. "I think he's going to be a wren," Ellie said. "But maybe he might be something else. My dad says you can't always decide at the beginning what something will be. He says sometimes you find out partway through." "Your dad's right about that." "Do you carve things?" "No, I build things, but different kinds of things. Buildings, projects." "That's like what my dad does." "A little bit. Your dad's better at it than I am." "He's really good," Ellie agreed, with the uncomplicated pride of a child who hasn't yet learned to hedge compliments. "He fixed our kitchen sink last year, and it actually stayed fixed. He says most fixes don't actually fix things, they just move the problem somewhere else. He says a real fix goes to where the thing is actually broken." A pause. "He sounds like he thinks a lot," Victoria said. "He thinks too much sometimes. He says that himself. He lies awake." A pause. Do you lie awake? A beat. Then Victoria said, Yeah, more than I'd like. What do you think about? Another pause. Things I'm trying to figure out how to build. What kind of things? Logan, standing very still at the window, heard Victoria say, The kind that don't come with blueprints. Ellie considered this. Dad says those are the hardest kind, but also the most important. Yeah, Victoria said. I think that's right. Logan moved away from the window and went back to the trim, and he thought about his daughter, 8 years old, still becoming like the bird she was carving, and he thought about blueprints and the absence of them and what it meant to start building something when you didn't know yet what it was going to be. He thought about the fox on the door. He thought about 8 words said in a cedar-smelling shop on a Tuesday afternoon. Outside on the porch, his daughter was carving something into shape, one cut at a time. Patient, getting it wrong sometimes and correcting, not knowing what it would be yet, but trusting the process enough to keep going. He understood that impulse completely. The gossip piece died in 48 hours, exactly as Victoria had predicted. Her communications director released a 3-sentence statement that managed to be simultaneously dismissive, factually airtight, and mildly condescending toward the publication in question. And by Friday, the story had been buried under a zoning dispute downtown and a local chef's appearance on a cable cooking competition. Logan saw his name mentioned in 2 follow-up comments on the original post, neither of them particularly interesting, and then it was over. Except it wasn't over because the thing the article had pointed at was still there, unchanged, accumulating weight the way water accumulates behind a dam, quietly, with no visible drama, and with significant implications for what comes next. Logan kept going to the house, Victoria kept coming, Ellie kept carving on the porch, and somewhere in the ordinary rhythm of that, the coffees, the Saturday lunches, the evenings when Victoria stayed later than she'd probably planned, something was being built that none of them had formally agreed to build. He noticed it most in the small things. Victoria had started keeping a second mug at the house, her own, a wide ceramic one she'd brought from her apartment downtown. It sat on the windowsill of the kitchen beside Logan's travel thermos, like the two of them had been sharing that particular stretch of counter for years. He noticed it one morning and didn't say anything about it, and she didn't say anything about it, and the mug stayed. Ray noticed too. Ray noticed everything, quietly, and filed it away without comment, which was one of the things Logan valued about him. Deontay was less subtle. He'd made one remark, early on, along the lines of, she comes around a lot for someone who's not the hands-on type, and Logan had given him a look, and Deontay had nodded and moved on. They were good men. They knew the difference between what was their business and what wasn't. The renovation work in those weeks settled into a rhythm that Logan found genuinely satisfying. They'd moved into the interior finish phase, which was his favorite part of any old house, the stage where the heavy structural corrections were done and the work became about detail and craft. Restoring the original plaster medallions in the front rooms, rebuilding the staircase balustrade from reclaimed white oak that matched the existing newel posts, rehanging the interior doors, solid fir, original hardware cleaned and repinned, the kind of work that required patience and a willingness to be wrong the first time and try again. He was rehanging the door to the back bedroom on a Wednesday morning. Alone, Ray and Deontay were both on another job that week, when his phone rang. Unknown number, area code he didn't recognize, and he almost let it go to voicemail. He picked up anyway. Is this Logan Mercer, the contractor? It is. My name is Damian Cross. I'm a real estate investment consultant. I work primarily with high net worth individuals in the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic. I'm hoping I can speak with you about Victoria Sterling. Logan set down the hammer. What about her? I've recently been in contact with Ms. Sterling regarding a significant investment opportunity, and I understand you have a close professional relationship with her. I wanted to introduce myself, colleague to colleague, so to speak, and ask whether she's mentioned my proposal to you. Logan looked at the door he'd been hanging. I'm her contractor. I restore her house. That's the relationship. Of course. Damian Cross had the kind of voice that was warm in a calibrated way, the warmth of someone who had practiced warmth until it became a technique. I only ask because projects like the one I'm bringing to her table tend to affect a property owner's priorities. A significant investment commitment can impact renovation budgets, timelines. I'd hate for you to be caught off guard. I appreciate that, Logan said, in the voice he used when he didn't appreciate something at all. But Victoria's business decisions aren't my concern. Understood entirely. A brief pause. I've heard excellent things about your work, by the way. The Caldwell house has a long history. It'll be a beautiful restoration. Thank you. We should have coffee sometime. I'd love to connect. Sure, Logan said, which in the dialect of men who have no intention of having coffee means something more like we're done here. He hung up and stood in the empty bedroom with the unhinged door leaning against the wall beside him, and he thought about the call for longer than it probably warranted. It was the small things that bothered him. The way the man had said close professional relationship with a slight emphasis that was too careful. The way he'd framed a heads up about investment changes as a courtesy to Logan rather than what it actually was, which was a quiet attempt to figure out what Logan knew and how much access he had. The fact that he'd called Logan's cell rather than emailing through the company contact form, which meant he'd sourced the number some other way. Logan picked up the hammer and went back to the door. He didn't mention the call to Victoria that day. He wasn't sure yet what there was to mention. She brought him up herself 3 days later on the porch at the end of a Saturday afternoon. Ellie had gone inside to wash the sawdust off her hands, and Victoria and Logan were sitting on the steps in the cooling October air, and she said, looking at the tree line, not at him, "A consultant reached out to me last week. Investment opportunity, private luxury resort development, somewhere in the Outer Banks. He's been persistent." Damien Cross? She turned. You know him? He called me. Her expression shifted. Something sharpened behind her eyes. He called you. When? Wednesday. Said he was introducing himself, asked if you'd mentioned his proposal. Victoria was quiet for a moment. The sharpened look didn't leave. He didn't tell me he'd contacted you. No, I wouldn't think he would. She turned back to the tree line. The evening light was doing something complicated in the oaks. That particular autumn quality where everything seems slightly more vivid than it should, like the season is showing off before it ends. The proposal is legitimate on its face, she said, or appears to be. He has a full prospectus, project documents, site surveys. The numbers are aggressive but not absurd. It would be a significant commitment. He's talking about a $12 million anchor investment from a small group of primary backers. That's a lot of money. It's not the money that concerns me. She stopped, chose her words carefully, which meant she'd been thinking about this for a while. He's very good at the presentation, at making you feel like you've been specifically selected, like this opportunity was built around you, which is how it's supposed to feel, Logan said. Yes. She paused. I've been in business long enough to know that the deals that feel personally tailored are usually the ones that aren't, but I can't find anything wrong with the paperwork. Have you had your legal team review it? I have a meeting scheduled for Tuesday. She looked at him. Why did he call you? Logan thought about it. I think he was trying to figure out how much I know, how close we are, whether you talk to me about your business. She held his gaze. Do I? Sometimes. A beat. What did you tell him? That I'm your contractor. She nodded slowly. That's the correct answer. I know. The word sat between them for a moment. Correct. Both of them aware that it was accurate and insufficient at the same time. From inside the house, they heard Ellie asking, to no one in particular, whether there were any more of the crackers from lunch. Then the sound of cabinet doors. I'll look into him, Victoria said finally, quietly, before Tuesday. Okay. She stood, brushed dried oak leaves off the back of her jeans and said, Thank you for telling me. You'd have figured it out. Probably, but it would have taken longer. She looked at him in the particular way she'd been looking at him lately. Direct, unhurried, carrying more weight than a simple look should be able to hold. I'm not used to people being on my side for no reason. There are reasons. She almost said something. Then Ellie appeared in the doorway holding a sleeve of crackers in triumph, and the moment closed, and Victoria laughed at something Ellie said about crackers belonging in the kitchen and not in the toolbox, which was fair criticism of something Logan had done the week before. He called Marcus Webb that Sunday night. Marcus had been Logan's bunkmate for 14 months during his second tour, a man who had gone into federal law enforcement after discharge and was currently, as far as Logan understood it, doing something for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division that he wasn't especially forthcoming about at dinner parties. They still talked every few weeks. Marcus was one of maybe 4 people in Logan's life who qualified as genuinely close. "I need a favor," Logan said, "and I need it quiet." "Quiet how?" "Just private. Not official." A person look up. A pause. "Logan." His name's Damian Cross, investment consultant. Operates in the Southeast, says he works with high net worth individuals. He approached someone I know about a $12 million luxury resort investment and then called me separately to pump me for information about her. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "She a client?" "Yes." "Just a client?" Marcus, just checking the parameters." "She's someone I care about," Logan said, which was the first time he'd said it in exactly those words to anyone, including himself. "And something about this guy is wrong. I can't put my finger on it, but it's wrong." "Okay," Marcus said in a different tone, the professional tone. "Send me everything you have on him. Name, any contact info he gave you, the name of any firm he's associated with. I'll see what I can find from public records. If there's anything in the system I can't share, I'll at least tell you to keep digging. That's all I'm asking." "Logan," a pause. "If this is what I think it might be, and this kind of approach, the targeting, the investment pitch, it's not usually a one-time operation. These people have patterns. I know. Be careful. Always." "No, you're not, but okay." Marcus hung up. The week that followed was ordinary on the surface. Logan and his crew worked through the library windows and started on the back bedroom floors, which needed significant refinishing. The original fur was sound, but had been covered with linoleum sometime in the 70s, and removing the linoleum without damaging the boards beneath required a patience that tested even Ray's considerable reserves of it. Deontay spent most of Wednesday talking to the linoleum in terms that were not suitable for company. The boards underneath were worth it. Dark honey fur, old growth, tight grain. Beautiful. Victoria came Tuesday for her legal team meeting, which Logan knew about but wasn't present for. She texted him afterward. Nothing obviously wrong. They want more time with the site survey documents. Cross is pushing for a meeting at the end of the month. He wrote back, "Don't agree to anything until you're ready." A pause. Then, "I know how to run a negotiation, Logan." He smiled at his phone. "I know. I'm saying it anyway." Another pause. "Fine. Are you coming Saturday?" "Always." He didn't analyze the exchange. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to the floors. Ellie, that Thursday, had a parent-teacher conference that Logan sat through in a plastic chair sized for someone 30 years younger, while Ellie's teacher, Ms. Parrish, told him that Ellie was doing well academically and exceptionally well in art and spatial reasoning, but that she occasionally seemed distracted in ways that suggested she was thinking about something more interesting than whatever was happening in class. "That's hereditary," Logan said. Ms. Parrish smiled. "She talks about a house a lot. A project her father is working on." "We're restoring a house, yeah." She drew a very detailed floor plan of it for a class project last week, from memory. Ms. Parrish turned her laptop around to show him. The floor plan was crooked in the way that children's drawings are crooked and thoroughly labeled library, porch, where I work, kitchen with old smell. And in the upper right corner, Ellie had drawn 2 small figures standing at the front door. One was clearly Logan, identified by the tool belt. The other was a woman with her hair up. She'd labeled the second figure, too. Logan looked at that for a moment. "She seems very fond of whoever that is," Ms. Parrish said neutrally. "Yeah," Logan said. "She is." He thought about showing Victoria the photo. He took a picture of the laptop screen with his phone, told himself he'd decide later, and drove home to make dinner for his daughter, who was already thinking in floor plans at the age of 8, and had apparently decided, without consulting him, that the woman he was trying not to think about was permanent enough to put in a drawing. Kids. They saw things before you admitted you were looking. Damian Cross arrived for his first in-person meeting with Victoria on a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after the initial phone call to Logan. Logan wasn't at the Caldwell house that day. He'd taken the afternoon off because Ellie had an early dismissal and a fall festival at school, and he'd walked through the whole thing with her, the beanbag toss, the caramel apples, the fifth-grade pumpkin carving that was inexplicably competitive. He was fine. He'd made peace with being the dad who knew all the teachers' names and showed up to the festival with a camera. He heard about the meeting from Victoria that evening, a text at 8:15. He was here. 2 associates with him, very polished, left revised documents. Logan was sitting on the couch, reading a book he wasn't absorbing. How did it feel? A long pause. Like being sold something. That's your instinct talking. I know. But the paperwork still looks clean. My team is reviewing the revision. He typed, "Did he mention me?" And then deleted it and typed instead, "Trust the feeling. Numbers can be constructed." She replied after a moment, "Says the man who measures twice." Exactly. Logan, "Yeah. Are you free for coffee tomorrow morning? Not at the house, somewhere downtown. I need to think out loud, and I think better when I'm not in my own apartment." He looked at that for a moment. Then, 7:30? There's a place on College Street. I'll find it. He set the phone down. Ellie called from her bedroom that she'd finished her homework. Could she carve for 30 minutes before bed? He said yes. He heard the small sounds of her settling into it, the scrape of the chisel, careful and deliberate. And he sat on the couch in his rented house on a Friday night in October thinking about Damian Cross's polished associates and revised documents, and a woman who trusted her instincts but needed someone to think out loud with. He thought about the way she'd said, "I almost wish that weren't a joke." He thought about Ms. Parrish's laptop screen and the small figure labeled V standing in the doorway of a house that wasn't finished yet. He thought about patterns, the kind Marcus had mentioned, the kind that looked like opportunity from the front and looked entirely different from the back. He didn't sleep especially well that night, which wasn't unusual. He lay in the dark listening to the house settle and thought about structures, the kind he built, the kind he couldn't, the way the most important ones were always the ones you couldn't see yet from where you were standing. The coffee place on College Street was called Grounds, and it was exactly the kind of spot Logan preferred. Small, not decorative about it, the espresso machine old enough to have opinions. He got there 7 minutes early and got a table in the back where it was quieter, ordered 2 coffees without asking because he knew by now, and Victoria came in at 7:32 in jeans and a dark jacket with her hair down, which he'd seen rarely enough that it still registered. She sat down, picked up the coffee, looked at it. "You already ordered." "I know how you take it." She looked at him over the rim. "That's either convenient or alarming." "Probably both." She almost smiled. Then the almost smile faded and she wrapped both hands around the cup and said, "He asked me at the end of the meeting yesterday whether I had a financial advisor I trusted, someone I ran major decisions by." "What did you say?" "I said I had a legal team and a CFO." "What did he say?" "He said that was different from someone who knew me personally. Someone who had my interests rather than their fee at heart." She paused. "And then he said he hoped I had someone like that in my life." Logan was quiet. "He said it pleasantly," she said. "It was pleasant the whole time. He's very pleasant." She said the word like it was a diagnosis. But what he was doing was asking me if there was anyone who might push back, anyone whose opinion I'd weight over the documents. He was checking for obstacles. "Yes." She looked at her coffee. "Which means he's aware the deal might not survive scrutiny from someone who isn't looking at his paperwork." Logan leaned forward slightly. "Victoria, I called someone, an old friend who works in federal financial crimes. I asked him to look into Cross quietly." She looked up. "I haven't heard back yet," he said. "It might be nothing. But the call he made to me, the way this meeting sounds, something's wrong. I've been around enough bad foundations to know when the problem is structural." She held his gaze for a long moment. "You did that without asking me." "Yes." "I'm not angry." She said it slowly, like she was checking it as she said it. "I'm just—" She stopped. No one's done that before. Moved without being asked, in my direction. Your ex-husband didn't. Preston moved in directions that served Preston. She said it flatly, without bitterness, the way you say something that you've processed thoroughly enough that it no longer has edges. I was the territory, not the person. Logan didn't say anything. I've run this company for 6 years, she said. I've made better decisions than my father, better decisions than the board expected, better decisions than the press gave me credit for. And I am very good at knowing when someone is trying to make me feel cared for as a tactic. She looked at him directly. You're not doing that. No. I know. A pause. That's what makes it complicated. The coffee shop noise moved around them. The machine, someone's chair scraping, a conversation near the window about something ordinary. Logan watched her and she watched him, and neither of them moved to resolve what was complicated about what she'd just said, because resolving it wasn't the point of the morning. Tell me when you hear back from your friend, she said finally. I will. And Logan. She picked up her coffee again. Don't stop moving without being asked. She considered. It's a good quality. I'm still deciding what to do with it, but it's a good quality. He nodded. She looked out the window at the street, and the morning light caught the side of her face, and she looked tired in the way she always looked when she'd been carrying something longer than she should have. He wanted to say something. Several things. He said none of them. Some foundations needed more time before you could build on them. He knew that better than anyone. Marcus called on a Tuesday. Logan was on the roof of the Caldwell house, checking the flashing around the chimney, a section Ray had flagged the previous week as potentially compromised, when his phone buzzed in his chest pocket. He saw the name, climbed down the ladder carefully, and walked to the far edge of the yard before answering. Talk to me, Logan said. Okay. Marcus's voice had the particular quality it got when he was being precise. Slower than usual, every word placed. First, this is not official. I did not run this through any database I'm not authorized to access. Everything I'm about to tell you is from public records, court filings, and one conversation with a colleague in the Atlanta field office who owed me a favor and is now even. Understood. Damian Cross, real name, not an alias. He's comfortable enough to use it, which tells you something about his confidence level. 44 years old, originally from Savannah, has operated under 3 different consulting firm names over the past 11 years. The current one is Meridian Advisory Group, which has a clean website and a rented office address in Charlotte that I'd bet money is a mail forwarding service. Logan watched a crow land in the oak at the edge of the yard. What's the pattern? Wealthy women, specifically recently divorced, recently widowed, or recently through some other major financial transition that leaves them asset-rich and emotionally unsettled. He identifies them through property records, divorce filings, estate probate, all public documents. Then he builds a profile, figures out their business background, their interests, their networks. He's patient. He doesn't rush. The investment pitch. It varies. Luxury resort development, boutique hotel acquisition, private marina, always something in the hospitality-adjacent real estate space, always plausible enough to withstand casual scrutiny. He puts together legitimate-looking documents, and I mean genuinely sophisticated paperwork, Logan. He uses real survey data, real market projections. He pays for quality. Because the pitch has to survive a legal team review. Exactly. The documents are designed to look clean until after the money moves. Once the initial deposit transfers, and it's always a deposit, never the full amount, because a deposit feels lower stakes, the project develops complications. The property falls through. A partner pulls out. There are unexpected regulatory issues. He's very apologetic. He works very hard to keep the victim emotionally invested in the relationship rather than focused on recovering the money. By the time they realize what happened, months have passed, and the paper trail is structured in a way that makes civil recovery extremely difficult. Logan was quiet for a moment. The crow had been joined by 2 others. How many? My Atlanta contact knows of 4 confirmed victims in the past 7 years. Losses ranging from $800,000 to just over $2 million. None of them resulted in criminal charges. The women either didn't report, didn't want the exposure, or couldn't make the fraud case stick given the document structure. He walks away clean every time. A pause. He's getting more ambitious. A $12 million anchor investment is significantly larger than anything he's targeted before. He's escalating. She must look like a significant opportunity to him. Major assets, recent divorce, rebuilding publicly. She fits every part of his profile. Logan looked back at the house. The chimney flashing caught the morning light. Is there enough to go to the police? With what I've just told you, no. The pattern is clear to people who know what they're looking at, but it's not actionable without a victim willing to file and enough documentation to establish intent rather than just a deal that went bad. Another pause. What you need is to stop the transfer before it happens. Get her away from the table completely. Once no money moves, there's nothing he can do. She has a meeting at the end of the month. He's been pushing her to sign documents and transfer a deposit. Then you have maybe 2 weeks. Does she trust you? Yes. Completely? I'm working on it. Marcus made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Logan, I need you to hear me clearly. This man is very good at reading people and very good at managing them. If he senses that she's pulling back because of outside influence, he will adapt. He will work to isolate the outside influence. That means he will come at you again, and this time it won't be a friendly phone call. I know. Be careful. But you said that last time. I meant it last time too. Logan hung up, stood in the yard for another minute. The crows watched him from the oak tree with the judgmental patience that crows excel at, and he looked back at the house. His work, her house, the thing they'd been building together for months, and felt something cold and resolved settle into his chest. He called Victoria. She answered on the third ring, slightly distracted. I'm in a meeting in 20 minutes. I know, I'll be quick. He paused. I heard from my contact. It's bad, Victoria. Cross has done this before, multiple times, to women who fit your profile exactly. He's careful, he's sophisticated, and he has never been charged because his paperwork is designed to make fraud cases difficult to prosecute. Silence on her end. I have details, Logan said. I want to go through them with you in person. Tonight, if you can. A pause. How bad? Bad enough that I don't want you anywhere near that end-of-month meeting. Another silence, longer. He could hear her breathing, hear the particular quality of her processing. Not panicking, not dismissing, just absorbing. Come to the house tonight, she said. 7. I'll be there. She hung up. Logan stood in the yard a moment longer, then went back to the ladder and climbed up to finish checking the chimney flashing, because the roof still needed doing and falling apart wasn't a luxury the day allowed. He arrived at the Caldwell house at 6:55 with a folder of notes he'd written out after the call. Marcus's information organized as clearly as he could manage, the pattern laid out, dates and amounts from what Marcus had described. He wasn't a lawyer, he wasn't an investigator, but he could organize information, and organization was what she'd need to see. Victoria opened the front door before he reached the porch steps. She'd changed from whatever she'd worn to her meetings into something simpler. Dark pants, a gray sweater. And she had the look she got when she'd already been thinking hard about something for several hours. Come in, she said. I made coffee. I also made eggs because I hadn't eaten since noon and I assumed you hadn't either. I had a sandwich at 2. Then you can watch me eat eggs. She turned and went toward the kitchen. Logan followed. The kitchen was still mid-renovation. New cabinets were in, but the countertops hadn't been installed yet, so there was a section of plywood over the base cabinets that was serving as a working surface, and Victoria had apparently decided this was functional enough. There was a pan on the camp stove they kept in the room for exactly this kind of situation, and the smell of butter and onion was doing something generous for the air in the half-finished kitchen. He sat on a 5-gallon bucket, the closest thing to a chair in the room, and opened the folder. He went through everything Marcus had told him, methodically, without editorializing too much, because she didn't need his commentary. She needed the information. She ate and listened. She asked 2 questions, one about the document structure and one about the timeline of the previous victims, both of which were precise questions that cut to exactly the right places. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. 4 women, she said. At minimum. Those are the ones Marcus's contact knows of. And none of them reported. No. She set down her fork, looked at the plywood countertop. I almost understand that. The exposure. The embarrassment of being the businesswoman who got taken, the way it would get written about. Her jaw tightened slightly. I almost understand it, which makes me angry. You haven't been taken. Not yet. She looked at him. He's good, Logan. I want you to understand that. I've been in rooms with sophisticated people my entire career, and he is genuinely good. The pitch felt personalized because it was personalized. He researched me. He knew which projects I'd been involved in, what my aesthetic preferences were, what kind of development language I responded to. He built a version of this deal that looked like something I would have designed myself. That's the tell, actually. Marcus said that's one of the consistent patterns. The deal is always calibrated to feel like it came from the target's own head. So you feel like you're not being sold to. You feel like you're being understood. She said it with a particular flatness. Preston was the same. Every lie he told me felt like something I'd wanted to hear. Logan didn't say anything. I'm not going to do this again, she said. Not loud, not emotional, just definitive, the way she was definitive about structural decisions. Not the money I can absorb, She stopped. Being managed, being read, and then played back to myself. I'm not doing that again. You're not going to have to. You're walking away from the table. I know. She looked at the folder in his hands. Can I keep that? He handed it to her. She looked through the notes, the same way she looked through documents, reading every line, not skimming. He watched her and thought about what Marcus had said about Cross adapting when he sensed a target pulling back. He's going to push harder when you cancel the meeting, Logan said. I know. Marcus thinks he might come at me again. Try to figure out where the resistance is coming from. She looked up from the folder. What do you mean, come at you? I mean, he'll try to neutralize me. He already knows I'm close to you. If he figures out I'm the one who flagged him, Logan, her voice had sharpened, he's not going to do anything to you. I'm not worried about it. I'm serious. She set the folder down on the plywood counter. If he comes near you or near Ellie, he's a con man. He's not dangerous in that way. You don't know that. Marcus says his MO is clean exits. He doesn't threaten people. It creates exposure. She held his gaze. The sharpness in her eyes wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. It was something that occupied the space between the two. The particular emotion of someone who has identified a threat to something they value and is calculating responses. He realized, sitting on a 5-gallon bucket in her half-finished kitchen, that the thing she was calculating responses to protect was partly him. He didn't know what to do with that, so he did what he usually did with things he didn't know what to do with, filed it carefully, and kept moving. I'll call my legal team tonight, she said. I want everything Cross has sent me reviewed again with this context, and I want a record established, dates of contact, content of communications, in case anything does go to enforcement later. That's smart, and I'm going to cancel the meeting. She picked up her coffee. In a way that doesn't tip him off immediately. I want a few days to get the documentation in order before he knows I'm gone. Logan nodded. Don't let him get you alone again. Any follow-up, do it through your team. I wasn't planning to let him get me alone again regardless. She paused. How much did this cost you? Your contact? Conversation, favor, nothing that costs money. I'll figure out something to... Victoria. She stopped. Don't, he said simply. She looked at him for a moment, then she nodded once and let it go. And that was one of the things about her that he'd come to appreciate most. When she understood a line, she didn't push against it for the sake of pushing. The weeks between that conversation and the end of the month were the tightest of the renovation. Logan felt it in the way he felt structural tension in old buildings, not dramatically, not with obvious signs, but as a constant low-level awareness that something was under load. He kept his head down and worked. The back bedroom floors were finished and sealed and were, in his honest assessment, the most beautiful thing he'd done in years. The old fur glowing under the oil finish like something that had been waiting decades to be seen properly. He and Ray spent 3 days on the staircase balustrade, fitting the hand-turned oak balusters one by one into the restored treads. And when they stood back and looked at it at the end of the 3rd day, Ray said nothing for a moment and then said, "Man," which from Ray was effusive. Deontay started the kitchen countertops, honed soapstone, gray-green, exactly right for the age of the house, and the room finally started to look like the place it had always been trying to be. Through all of it, Logan tracked what was happening with Damian Cross, the way you track a problem in a structure you're responsible for. Carefully, without paranoia, but without looking away. Victoria canceled the end-of-month meeting 5 days before it was scheduled, citing a conflict with her board and offering to reschedule. Cross's response, forwarded to Logan by Victoria with no caption, was 3 paragraphs of warm regret and gentle urgency. He mentioned other interested investors, discussed how these windows had a way of closing, and it was smooth enough that Logan read it twice to make sure he was reading what he thought he was reading. He was. "He's applying pressure," Logan texted her. "I know. I've seen this negotiating tactic in commercial deals. It's usually a signal that the other party needs you more than they're showing." Exactly. He rescheduled for 2 weeks out. I agreed to keep him from getting suspicious. My team is documenting everything. 2 days later, Cross emailed again, this time with a revised deck, updated financials, and a paragraph at the end that mentioned he'd had a wonderful conversation with someone in the Asheville development community who spoke very highly of Victoria, and who had mentioned that she was deep in a renovation project with a local craftsman that seemed to be taking up a great deal of her time and focus. Victoria forwarded it with, "He's been asking about you." Logan stared at that line for a moment, then called Marcus. "He's doing opposition research on me," Logan said. "That's what I was afraid of." Marcus's voice was flat and careful. "He's going to try to reframe you as a problem, a distraction, or an influence that isn't in her best interest. It's how he's handled interference before. He doesn't confront, he reframes." "How?" "If he can make her question your motives to suggest you have a financial or personal interest in keeping her from the deal, he can neutralize the warning you gave her. He plants the idea that you might be jealous, or looking to keep her dependent on you professionally, or—" Marcus paused. "He'll go for whatever vulnerability he thinks exists. What's the most complicated thing about your relationship with her?" Logan was quiet for a moment. "That it's not just professional anymore, and we haven't defined what it is." "Then that's what he'll use. He'll imply that your judgment is compromised by personal interest, that you're not actually protecting her. You're protecting your position." "She won't believe that." "Are you sure?" Logan thought about it honestly, the way he thought about load calculations, without wishful thinking. He thought about what she'd said in the coffee shop. "No one's done that before." Moved without being asked, in my direction. He thought about the way she looked at him and the way she still, sometimes, flinched back from things she wanted, because wanting things had cost her before. "I don't know," he said. "Then you need to tell her what's coming before he does." He went to her apartment downtown that evening, not the house, her actual apartment where he'd never been. And she opened the door in the same gray sweater as before, which meant she'd had a long enough day that she'd gone straight for comfort when she got home. She looked at his face and said, "What happened?" "Nothing yet. But Marcus thinks Cross is going to try to undermine me. Suggests my judgment is compromised because of us. Whatever us is." He paused. "I wanted you to hear that from me before you heard it from him." She looked at him for a moment in the doorway. Then she stepped back and let him in. The apartment was smaller than he'd imagined and less curated. A good couch, books on a lot of surfaces, a kitchen that looked like it was used only for coffee and takeout. The kind of space that belonged to someone whose real life happened elsewhere. She sat on the couch and he sat in the chair across from her, and she said, "He's going to suggest you have a conflict of interest." "Yes." "That you're keeping me away from the deal because you want something from me." "Yes." She was quiet. He watched her think, really think, not perform thinking. And he waited. "Do you?" she asked. Plainly, without accusation, just the question. "Yes," he said, "but not the deal, and not in a way that affected my judgment about Cross. He's a predator. That's true regardless of anything between us." She held his gaze. "I know that. I know you know. I'm saying it out loud anyway because Marcus is right that the argument is effective even when it's false, and I don't want there to be any version of it that has a foothold." She nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. Always. She looked at her hands, a long pause. The meeting is in 9 days. My team has everything. The documentation is solid. She looked up. When he tries the argument about you, and he will, you're right. I'm going to let him make it, completely. And then I'm going to tell him the meeting is canceled permanently. You want to let him play the card. I want him to think it worked. I want him relaxed and overconfident when I pull the table out from under him. Her jaw was set, the way it set when she'd made a decision she intended to hold. He spent months studying me. He built a version of this deal designed to look like my own idea. He called my contractor to check for interference. He's patient and smart and completely certain he knows exactly who I am. She paused. He's going to find out he got it wrong. Logan looked at her. This woman sitting in her small apartment in her comfort sweater, tired from a long day, calm in the way that people are calm when they've stopped being afraid of something and started being angry about it instead. He thought about the house, the bones of it, sound and true under everything that had been done to it over the decades, the way it had been waiting, without drama, to be seen for what it actually was. Okay, he said. 9 days, she said. I'll be there. She blinked. You don't have to. I'll be there. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her expression. Complicated, layered, the kind of thing that didn't have a clean name. Then she said quietly, Okay. Outside her apartment window, the city made its ordinary nighttime sounds. Inside, the two of them sat in the particular silence of people who have passed the point of pretending and not yet arrived at whatever comes next. And the 9 days between now and the end of Damian Cross's scheme felt both very long and not long enough. Logan drove home at 9:30, picked up the folder of notes he'd left on his kitchen table, and sat at the table going through it again. Not because there was anything new in it, but because he was the kind of man who needed to understand the shape of what he was walking into. He built things. He knew how load worked. He knew that the moment before something gives way is usually the quietest moment, the one where everything looks almost fine. Almost. He went to bed at 11 and lay in the dark and thought about 9 days and an 8-year-old girl's drawing with a small figure labeled V in the doorway and the way a woman looked when she stopped running from something and turned around to face it. He thought about what it meant to be someone's person in the way that actually mattered. Not the easy version, not when it was pleasant and uncomplicated, but the version where you showed up 9 days before something hard and said, I'll be there, and meant it without reservation. He meant it without reservation. That, more than anything he'd said out loud, was the thing he was most certain of. The 9 days passed. The way difficult waiting always passes. Not slowly, exactly, but with a heightened texture to everything, each ordinary moment carrying a little more weight than it should. Logan worked. That was what he did when things were unresolved and outside his control. He worked, kept his hands busy, kept his attention on what was in front of him. The kitchen countertops went in on day 3, and watching Deontay set the final piece of soapstone into place was the kind of satisfaction that no amount of psychological complexity could diminish. The house was becoming what it had always wanted to be, one irreversible decision at a time. Victoria texted him on day 5. He made the argument. About you. Logan had been expecting it. He was standing in the library running his hand along the finished window trim when the message came through, checking for anything that would need touch-up before the paint crew arrived. How? He typed back. An email. Very careful, very warm. Expressed concern that I might be getting advice from someone who had a personal and financial stake in keeping my attention close to home. Suggested that contractors sometimes develop an attachment to long-term clients that clouds professional boundaries. Said he had my best interests at heart and wanted to make sure I was making this decision freely. Logan read it twice. Then, textbook. I know. I nearly laughed. Nearly. A pause, then, I replied that I appreciated his concern and looked forward to our meeting. He responded within 4 minutes. He was relieved. Good. Let him be relieved. My legal team will be present at the meeting. I told him it was standard procedure for anything at this investment level. He accepted it. Logan put the phone back in his pocket and looked at the library windows. afternoon light cutting through the new glass in long, clean rectangles across the restored fir floor. He thought about Damien Cross sitting somewhere, relieved, certain he'd neutralized the obstacle, certain the path to $12 million was clear. The confidence of a man who had done this before and gotten away with it. He thought about the 4 women Marcus had mentioned, the ones who'd never reported, the ones who'd absorbed the loss rather than the exposure. He hoped, in some practical and unglamorous way, that what was going to happen in 4 days would eventually matter to them, even if they never knew it had happened. On day 7, something else happened that Logan hadn't anticipated. He was going through a box of materials he'd pulled from the root cellar early in the renovation. Old fixtures, a few pieces of decorative hardware, some papers that had been in a deteriorating cardboard box wedged behind a shelving unit. He'd inventoried the box months ago and set it aside, meaning to go through it properly when he had a quiet hour. That hour kept not arriving, and now with the renovation entering its final phase and the root cellar being prepped for waterproofing, he finally sat down with the box on a Saturday morning while Ray and Deontay were both off. Most of it was what he'd expected. Old hardware catalogs from the 1950s, a hand-drawn site plan of the property that predated the current survey by several decades, a few glass doorknobs that matched nothing currently in the house. Then, near the bottom, in a manila envelope that had gone soft with age, he found a bundle of photographs held together with a rubber band that had long since lost its elasticity and simply lay there, a collapsed ring. He set the rubber band aside carefully and looked at the photographs. They were from the late 1970s or early 1980s. The color had gone warm and faded in that way that photographs from that era do, everything looking slightly like late afternoon, even when it wasn't. Most of them were of the house itself, exterior shots, a few of the interior rooms, the kind of documentation someone might make when they'd bought a property and wanted to record its condition. But 3 of them were different. 3 were candid. 2 women, both young, late 20s, maybe early 30s, standing in different parts of the property. One was taken on the porch, the 2 women side by side, both laughing at something outside the frame. Another was in what was now the library, the 2 of them bent over a table covered in papers that might have been drawings or plans. The third was out front, near the road, and they were facing each other with the body language of people in the middle of a serious conversation. Logan looked at the photos for a long time. Then he turned them over. On the back of the porch photo, in faded pencil, someone had written, Rose and Clara. First visit, October 1981. He sat very still. His mother's name had been Rose. Rose Mercer, née Holloway. She'd grown up in western North Carolina, moved briefly to Asheville in her late 20s before circumstances had pulled her home, back to the small town where she'd eventually married his father and where Logan had grown up. She'd died when Logan was 23, cancer, and the particular shape of that loss was still something he carried quietly in the way you carry things that don't have resolution. He didn't know anyone named Clara. He turned the library photo over. The Caldwell plan, R&C, spring 1982. He turned the third one over. Nothing on the back. He sat in the kitchen of the Caldwell house with 3 faded photographs and the particular feeling of a man who has pulled back a wall expecting insulation and found something structural that changes the geometry of everything. He didn't call Victoria immediately. He sat with it first because that was how he processed things. He needed to hold information before he shared it, understand its shape, figure out what it actually meant before he said it out loud and made it real in someone else's understanding. What he could piece together from the photographs and the notation on the back of the library photo. 2 women, his mother among them, had been involved in something related to this house in the early 1980s. A plan of some kind. The Caldwell plan. The house had been owned throughout that period by the Caldwell family, according to the property history he'd researched when he first took the job. It had stayed in the family until the estate auction 4 years ago. So whatever Rose and Clara had been doing here, it had been in relation to the Caldwell family's property. The name Clara nagged at him. He called his Aunt Bev that afternoon, so it's his mother's younger sister, the family archivist by temperament and necessity, the person who kept photographs and letters and could tell you with impressive accuracy the name of anyone who had passed through the family's orbit in the past 5 decades. Rose had a business partner, Bev said, without much hesitation, when Logan described what he'd found. Before she came back home, when she was living in Asheville. Clara somebody. They had some kind of plan together. Hospitality, I think. Bed and breakfast, or something bigger. I was young and didn't pay much attention. And then something happened. Rose never talked about it much. Claire's family had money troubles, or there was a falling out. I don't know the whole story. Rose came back home and never mentioned the Asheville plan again. It was one of those things that was sad, but you didn't ask about. A pause. Why? I found photographs, Logan said. At the property I'm working on. They were here, Rose and Clara, in this house. Silence. Bev, what was Clara's last name? Oh, Lord, it was... A pause. Something formal sounding. Sterling? No, wait. Another pause. Yes, Sterling. Clara Sterling. The word landed on Logan like a falling beam. He sat with the phone pressed to his ear, looking at the 3 photographs laid out on the plywood counter, and the specific quiet of the kitchen around him was the loudest quiet he'd experienced in years. Clara Sterling. Victoria Sterling's mother. He drove to the house on a Sunday, not the Caldwell house, but his own rented house, and then from there he drove to the address Victoria had given him for her apartment, because this was not a text message and it was not a phone call. He went there, and he knocked on her door, and she opened it in jeans and bare feet with a book in her hand, and took one look at his face and said, "Sit down. I need to tell you something." "I can see that. Sit down first." He sat. She closed the book and sat across from him in the same chair she'd been in the last time he was here, and she looked at him with the steady, patient attention she gave to things that mattered. He told her. From the beginning, the box in the root cellar, the photographs, the notation on the back, the call to his aunt. He laid the 3 photographs on the coffee table between them, the way he'd laid the folder of Marcus's information between them in the Caldwell house kitchen, and he watched her face as she looked at them. She picked up the porch photo first, held it close. Her face did something complicated and quiet that he gave her space to have. "That's her," she said. It wasn't a question. "The one on the left?" "Yes." She looked at it for a long time. Her mother had died 4 years ago. Logan had learned that peripherally, in the way you learn things about people you work closely with. Heart attack, unexpected, 63 years old. Victoria didn't talk about it much. She never told me about this. Any of this. She picked up the library photo, read the notation on the back. The Caldwell Plan, R&C, spring 1982. She would have been 27. My mother would have been 29. Victoria looked up at him. The expression on her face was one he hadn't seen before. Not the CEO face, not the carefully managed personal face, but something younger and less defended. They were friends. Close ones, it sounds like. My aunt said they had a business plan together, something in hospitality. She said there was a falling out or family trouble on your mother's side. She didn't know the specifics. Victoria was quiet for a moment. My grandfather. She set the photo down gently. My mother's father. He had very specific ideas about what Sterling money was for. He was resistant to my mother doing anything independent. She worked in the family business from the time she was old enough to work, the way my father eventually did too, and I don't think she had much space to... She stopped. She never talked about Asheville. She talked about Savannah, about Charleston, about places she'd traveled. She never mentioned Asheville at all. Maybe it was painful. Maybe she didn't want to explain what she'd given up. She picked up the 3rd photograph. The 2 women facing each other, caught in the middle of something real. They were planning something here, at this house. It looks that way. And then they both walked away from it. From each other too, apparently. My aunt didn't know what happened to the friendship afterward. Victoria set the photograph down. She looked at the 3 of them arranged on the table, Rose Mercer and Clara Sterling, young and unguarded, in the house that had been sitting empty for 40 years since they'd stood in it together making plans that never became anything. "That's why it felt like mine," Victoria said quietly. "When I bought it at the auction, I couldn't explain why I wanted that specific house. I'd looked at 7 other properties that month. Nothing felt right. And then the Caldwell estate came up and I sat in the auction and I just knew. I told myself it was the bones of the place, the potential. But there are houses with good bones all over this county. She paused. I wonder if she ever came back to look at it after everything fell apart. We'll probably never know. No. She was quiet for a moment. Then, your mother, what was she like? The question surprised him, though it shouldn't have. He thought about it honestly. Practical. Funny in a dry way that caught you off guard. She built things, not like I do, more in the gardening sense. She was always trying to make something grow where it hadn't before. He paused. She was stubborn about the things she believed in, and she had a hard time asking for help, which I've been told is hereditary. Victoria's mouth curved slightly. Your aunt told you that? Among others. She sounds like someone worth knowing. She was. He looked at the photographs. I think they both were. The room was quiet for a while. Outside, the city did its Sunday afternoon things. Someone's dog, someone's car, a door closing somewhere in the building. Victoria looked at the photographs and Logan looked at her, looking at them. And something was happening in the room that wasn't dramatic, wasn't cinematic, but was the kind of real that settles into the body and stays there. Logan? She looked up. Why do you think you ended up here? On this specific job? Referral, he said. Friend of a friend. I know, but... She stopped. I don't believe in neat explanations for things. I think coincidence is usually just pattern we haven't identified yet. But this is... She gestured at the photographs. This is a lot of pattern. 2 women started something in that house and didn't finish it, he said. And now their kids are finishing the house. And figuring out each other at the same time. Yeah. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. The last of the managed distance. The careful professional composure. Moving aside like furniture being rearranged to make room for something. She looked in that moment exactly like the woman in the photograph, young, real, caught in the middle of something she hadn't planned. I've been very slow about this, she said. I know. For good reasons. I know that too. But I'm aware that good reasons can become a permanent excuse if you let them. She looked at the photographs one more time. Our mothers didn't finish what they started because life got in the way, or people got in the way, and then they ran out of time. She paused. I don't want to run out of time. Logan said nothing. He waited. I'm not saying I know what this is, she said carefully. I'm saying I don't want to keep not finding out because I'm afraid of what it might cost me. Okay, he said. Okay, she said, and she meant it differently than she had the last time she'd said it, and they both knew that. The meeting with Damian Cross was 2 days later. Victoria held it at Sterling Property Group's downtown offices rather than at her apartment or the Caldwell house. Neutral professional ground, her territory by definition, with her legal team present and her CFO across the table. Logan was not in the meeting. That had been a deliberate decision, and the right one. His presence would have signaled too much, given Cross exactly the confirmation he was looking for about the nature of Logan's involvement. Instead, Logan was at the Caldwell house, alone, finishing the trim work in the back bedroom. He worked with the focused quiet of someone who needed his hands occupied. Victoria had given him a simple instruction before the meeting. I'll text you when it's done. He worked for 3 hours. He finished the back bedroom trim. He started on the hallway baseboards. He made coffee on this camp stove in the kitchen and stood at the soapstone counter drinking it, looking out the new window over the backyard. The window he and Ray had rebuilt from the sash up. Weighted correctly now, balanced, the kind of work that would outlast everyone currently standing in the room. His phone buzzed at 2:14 in the afternoon. It's done. He looked at the message. Done how? He typed. Done entirely. Come to the house when you can. I want to tell you in person. He drove from the Caldwell house to the Sterling Property Group offices in 14 minutes, which was technically possible if you took the back roads and didn't worry too much about yellow lights. Victoria was in the lobby when he arrived, which meant she'd been watching for him. Her legal team was still visible through the glass conference room doors at the back, 2 of them still at the table, gathering documents. Her CFO was on the phone. Cross and his associates were not present. She looked. He searched for the word and settled on clear. like after weather. Tell me, he said. He arrived exactly on time, which I've noticed predatory people often do. It's a control mechanism. His two associates were with him, same as before, very polished. They had an updated version of the deposit transfer documents. She paused. He made the case for the investment for about 20 minutes. Very good presentation. And then he told me he had a concern he wanted to raise as a friend. Because he considered himself a friend at this point, he said, about external influences that might be operating from personal interest rather than my interest. The argument about me. He spent 5 minutes on it. It was very careful, very kind-seeming. He said he'd heard some things from mutual contacts about my relationship with my contractor, and he was concerned that I was getting advice that was emotionally rather than financially motivated. He said he'd seen this kind of situation before, a professional relationship becoming personal in ways that complicated judgment. She paused. He said it all with genuine-seeming concern. He's very good. What did you do? I let him finish. Then I asked him which mutual contacts had been sharing information about my personal life because I wanted to thank them for their concern. She said this flatly, without performance. He deflected. So I thanked him for raising the issue and told him I'd taken it seriously and investigated thoroughly. And I told him I'd also taken seriously the information my contractor had shared with me about 4 previous investment targets in the Southeast whose deposits had been absorbed into projects that never materialized, and the 3 consulting firm names he'd operated under in 11 years, and the fact that Meridian Advisory Group's Charlotte address was a mail forwarding service. She paused. Then I put a folder on the table. My legal team had assembled it. Everything we'd documented, every communication, every red flag, the pattern analysis, the information about the previous targets. Logan was very still. How did he react? He was quiet for about 4 seconds, which was the only moment in the entire interaction where I saw something real on his face. She looked at Logan directly. Fear. Just for a second. Then it closed back up and he started to speak. Something about misunderstandings, context, his willingness to answer any questions, and I put the transfer documents on top of the folder. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a single torn strip of paper, the corner of a document, the kind of corner that has a signature line. She put it on the table between them. I tore up the contract in front of him, she said, and I told him to leave my building, and that if he or either of his associates contacted me, anyone on my staff, or anyone in my personal life again, the folder would go to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the North Carolina Attorney General's office simultaneously. Logan looked at the torn corner of the document. Did he leave? He left. A pause. Quietly. Which somehow made it worse, watching him just pick up his things and go, very calm, very contained, like a man who's calculated that this particular play didn't work and he'll find another one. Her voice was steady, but he could hear something under it. He's going to do this to someone else. Marcus is working on it. The documentation we built might help make a case even without you as the complainant. I want to be the complainant. She said it with a firmness that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. I've been thinking about it. The women who didn't report, I understand why. But I have resources they might not have had. I have a legal team and a platform and the ability to absorb the exposure. If I don't use those things, what are they for? She looked at him. Marcus's contact in Atlanta. Can you connect me? Yes. Good. She breathed out slowly. It's over. For now, for us, it's over. He picked up the torn corner of the contract. It was just paper, stock weight, legal formatting, but it had been something else an hour ago, and the difference mattered. You were right, she said quietly. It wasn't, don't do that. Don't minimize it. You were right, and you moved before I asked you to, and it mattered. She looked at him steadily. You matter. I want to be clear about that. Whatever this is, whatever we're figuring out, you matter to me. Not because of the house, and not because of Cross, and not because of what I found out about our mothers. Why then? She considered it, seriously, the way she considered things that deserved a serious answer. Because when I'm in a room with you, I think more clearly, she said. Not less. That's not nothing. After Preston, I assumed that caring about someone meant losing the thread of yourself, becoming someone's narrative. And she stopped. You've never once asked me to be a different version of myself. Why would I? Preston had about 12 reasons. Preston sounds like someone who needed the people around him smaller than they actually were. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, that's exactly what he was. She looked at Logan with an expression that was wholly unguarded and because of that slightly painful to receive, the way honest things sometimes were. Thank you for all of it. The house isn't done, he said. She almost laughed. I know. Few more weeks. I know that too. She looked at the torn piece of contract still in his hand. Can I keep that? He handed it to her. She put it in her pocket. That evening, Logan picked up Ellie from the neighbor who watched her on late days. And on the drive home, Ellie asked, the way she asked things, directly, without preamble, "Is Victoria okay?" Logan glanced at her in the rear view. "Why do you ask?" "Because you look like how you look when something bad almost happened but didn't. Like when the tree branch almost fell on the truck last winter." She was examining her thumbnail with the focused consideration of someone doing analysis. Did something bad almost happen to her? Yeah, but it didn't. Because of you. Because of her, mostly. I just helped. Ellie thought about this. She's tough, she said approvingly. I can tell. She's the kind of tough that doesn't show until you need it. Logan drove and thought about a woman who had sat in an antique store and said, I almost wish that weren't a joke, and who had torn up a contract in front of a man who'd spent months manipulating her, and who had said you matter to me with the straightforward difficulty of someone saying something true that costs something. Yeah, he said to his daughter. That's exactly what she is. Ellie nodded, satisfied. She went back to examining her thumbnail. Outside, the mountains of western North Carolina were doing their October thing in the last of the light. The ridgelines dark against a sky that hadn't decided yet whether to be purple or gray. And Logan drove home through the familiar road thinking about photographs from 1981 and two women who had stood in a house with plans they never got to finish and the strange patient way that some things wait to be completed. He thought about what Victoria had said. I don't want to run out of time. Neither did he. Neither did he. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after Victoria walked out of the Sterling Property Group conference room with a torn contract in her pocket. Logan found out the way most people find out about things they've been waiting on. Not dramatically, not with a phone call at a significant hour, but with a text from Marcus at 7:43 in the morning while he was standing at his kitchen counter eating toast over the sink because he hadn't gotten around to buying a new plate after Ellie had broken the last one 2 weeks ago, and neither of them had mentioned it. Cross is in custody. Charlotte Field Office picked him up this morning. 3 counts wire fraud, 2 counts interstate fraud. Your friend's documentation was part of the package. There's at least one other victim who agreed to come forward once she knew she wasn't alone. More may follow. Logan read it twice, set the toast down on the edge of the sink, stood in his kitchen in the early morning quiet. Ellie's cereal bowl still on the table, her backpack by the door, the sounds of her getting ready for school filtering down from upstairs. And felt something release in his chest that he hadn't fully realized he'd been holding. He forwarded the message to Victoria with no caption. Her reply came 11 minutes later. I know, my legal team called at 7. I've been sitting with it. A pause, then another message. Come to the house today if you can. I want to be there when I process this. He texted Ray to handle the morning and drove to the Caldwell house. She was already there when he arrived, sitting on the porch steps in the November cold with her hands around a coffee cup that had probably gone cool, wearing a coat she'd left at the house weeks ago and never taken home. She looked at him when he came up the drive, and he searched for it, like someone who had put something heavy down and wasn't quite sure yet what to do with her hands. He sat beside her on the steps. She handed him the coffee. He drank it, which was cold, and didn't say anything about it being cold. 4 other victims came forward, she said. My attorney called with an update an hour ago. The documentation we put together apparently gave the field office enough of a structural map of the pattern that the other women had something to point to. Something that said, this is what it looked like when it happened to me too. She paused. One of them lost $1.4 million. She never told her family. Logan was quiet. I keep thinking about her, Victoria said, sitting with that for however many years, having to rebuild quietly and never... She stopped. It should have been the last thing she had to carry. He put it on her like it was her failure, and she accepted that. You're making sure it becomes his failure on record. It was always his failure. It just needed someone to say so in a room where it would stick. She looked at the front door, the mahogany door with the fox knocker centered at chest height, the one they'd driven to an antique shop to find on an ordinary Tuesday that had turned out to be not ordinary at all. I'm glad it was me. I know. She handed him the rest of the coffee. He drank it. The trees at the edge of the property had gone mostly bare now, late November stripping them down to their actual shapes, and the house behind them was almost done. Almost. The gossip publication that had run the initial article about them posted a retraction 3 days after Cross's arrest, which Logan suspected was not unrelated to a call from Victoria's communications director. It was a brief retraction, perfunctory, the kind that acknowledges error without dwelling on it, but it was there in the public record, and it said what it needed to say. The previous characterization of Ms. Sterling's personal life had been speculative and unsupported, and the publication regretted the implication. Logan read it on his phone sitting in his truck outside a lumber yard and felt approximately nothing about it, which he noted with some satisfaction. He had never cared much about what strangers said about him in print. What had mattered to him during those weeks was whether the people he was responsible for, Ellie, his crew, Victoria, were being made to pay for his proximity to something complicated. They hadn't been. The retraction was just paperwork confirming what had already been true. Ellie, when he told her about the retraction, said, "Was there an article about you?" "About both of us, me and Victoria, a while back." She thought about this. What did it say? That we spent a lot of time together. Made it sound like more than it was. Ellie gave him the measured look she'd been perfecting since she was approximately 5 years old. Was it more than it was? Logan looked at his daughter across the kitchen table. "It's getting there," he said. Ellie nodded like this was precisely what she'd expected and turned back to her homework. The final weeks of the renovation had a quality that Logan associated with the end of any long project, a mix of satisfaction and something like grief, because you'd spent long enough in a place that leaving it felt like a small loss even when the leaving was the point. He'd felt it before on other houses, but not like this. This one was different in ways he'd stopped pretending to be objective about. He and Ray finished the upstairs hallway on a Monday. Deontay completed the kitchen tile on a Wednesday. The painting crew, a team Logan had worked with for years, husband and wife operation out of Weaverville, came through in the final week and did the interior in the colors Victoria had chosen over months of deliberation. A warm white for the main rooms, a deep muted blue-green for the library that picked up the color of the soapstone counters, a soft ochre for the back bedroom that Logan had initially been skeptical about and had been completely wrong to be skeptical about. It was exactly right. He installed the last piece of original hardware, a brass mortise lock on the library door cleaned and rekeyed, the mechanism smooth after a few hours of patient work, on a Friday afternoon. He stood in the doorway of the library and looked at the room, the window trim, the floor, the medallion he and Ray had spent 3 days restoring on the ceiling, the built-in bookshelves they'd rebuilt from the original configuration, the afternoon light coming through the new glass in the old frames. It was the best room he'd ever finished. He stood there for a while, alone, and let himself have that. Then he texted Victoria, "Library is done. Come see it when you can." She came the next morning, early, before the light had fully settled into the day. She walked into the library and stopped in the middle of it and turned slowly, looking at all of it, and she was quiet for long enough that Logan, standing in the doorway, had time to think about several things and decide not to say any of them. Finally, she said, "My mother would have loved this room." "Yeah," he said. "I think she would have." She turned to look at him. Her eyes were bright in a way that she probably would have preferred not to show, and he pretended not to notice, because that was the decent thing to do. "The house is almost done," she said. "Week, maybe 10 days for punch list." And then you're finished. The word landed between them with more weight than it should have carried. Finished was the professional word, the contractual word, the word that meant the job was complete and the relationship it had structured would need to restructure itself or end. They both heard it the same way. The work is finished, he said carefully. That's not the same thing. She looked at him. No, she said. It's not. He found the photograph frame at an art market on a Saturday in late November, 3 weeks before they were scheduled to do the final walkthrough. It wasn't fancy. Dark walnut, clean lines, the right proportions. The kind of frame that didn't perform, just held. He bought it, took it home, and spent a Sunday afternoon in his workshop with the 3 photographs from the root cellar, high-resolution scans he'd had made at a print shop, and the patience that his work had trained into him over more than a decade. He chose the porch photograph. Rose and Clara, October 1981, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. 2 young women at the beginning of something before the world had gotten in the way. He matted it carefully, centered, with room around the image that gave it the weight it deserved. Framed it, set it on the workbench, and looked at it for a while. It was a good photograph, not because of its technical qualities, the composition was slightly off, the way candid photographs often were, but because of what was in the people, the ease of them, the way they stood next to each other like they'd been standing next to each other for years and expected to keep doing so. The specific lightness of 2 people who believed in what they were building together. He wrapped it in brown paper and set it in the truck. Quote, Ellie had been working on her project for 6 weeks without telling him what it was. This was unusual. Ellie normally narrated her projects extensively, providing progress updates whether he asked for them or not. The silence around this particular piece of work had been notable, and when he'd glanced at it once on her workbench, she'd covered it quickly with a cloth, he'd caught only the impression of something small and rounded, carved from a pale wood he didn't immediately recognize. She was protective of it in the way she was rarely protective of things, which meant it was for someone specific. He didn't push. He'd learned, in 8 years of solo fatherhood, that some things needed the room to finish becoming before you asked what they were. The final walkthrough was scheduled for a Saturday morning in December. Logan arrived early before Victoria, the way he always had. He walked through the house alone one last time, not checking for problems. There were no problems left, just walking. The parlor with its restored plaster and the morning light moving across the original fir floor. The kitchen with its soapstone counter and the window over the backyard where he'd stood drinking cold coffee the morning after the arrest. The staircase, solid and beautiful, each baluster fitted by hand. The upstairs rooms, each one done, each one right. The library last, standing in the doorway the way he'd stood 6 months ago when the walls were still open and the ceiling medallion was crumbling and the room smelled like a century of dust and closed windows. What it smelled like now was wood and linseed oil and the faint mineral cool of old plaster, and it was quiet in the way that finished rooms are quiet, like the work is done and the space is resting, waiting for the life that will fill it. He went back downstairs and stood on the porch. Victoria arrived at 9. She came up the walk and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at the front of the house the way people rarely let themselves look at buildings. Not as an inventory, not as a transaction, but as something real. Her coat was the dark one she'd been wearing the morning she came to the antique store. Her hair was down. "You got here early," she said. "Habit?" She came up the steps and stood beside him, and they looked out at the property together. The gravel drive, the tree line, the Blue Ridge in the distance doing whatever mountains do in December, which is mostly exist with the kind of permanence that makes everything else feel appropriately small. "Ready?" he said. "Not quite," she said, and turned to face him. "I want to say something first." He waited. "I've been thinking about what it means to be someone who builds things," she said. "You do it literally. I've done it mostly in the financial sense. Structures of another kind, useful but not—" She stopped, considered. "Not like this. Not the kind you can stand inside and feel." She looked at the door. "Working with you this year, watching how you think about what's wrong with something and how to make it right, not cosmetically right, actually right, in the bones. I've been trying to apply that to other things, things that aren't houses. She paused. I haven't been especially good at letting things be actually right rather than just functional. You've been better than you think. You don't know what's in my head. I know what's in your actions. That's more reliable. She looked at him. I almost didn't buy this house. I sat in the auction, and I had a reason to let it go every 30 seconds, and I kept not letting it go, and I still can't entirely explain why. A pause. Now I think it was because it needed something I needed, to be taken seriously, to be understood for what it actually was, rather than managed into something convenient. Logan was quiet. You did that, she said, for the house and somewhere along the way, also for me. I don't know if you understand what that's worth to someone who spent 3 years being managed. Victoria Simone, I'm not finished. She said it gently. I know you're not a man who needs things said out loud. I know you've probably already calculated where this is going, and you're comfortable letting it arrive at its own pace, which is one of the things I find both deeply reassuring and occasionally maddening about you. She almost smiled. But I've spent enough of my life not finishing things. I'd like to finish this sentence. A beat. I love you. Not because of the house, and not because of our mothers, and not because you helped me with Cross, though all of those things are part of knowing you. I love you because you're someone I want to have around when things are good, and I want to have around when things are hard. And those are usually two different categories of person for me, but they're not with you. The December air moved through the porch. Logan looked at her. This woman who'd bought a house at an auction she almost left, who'd laughed in an antique store and then told the truth by accident and spent months not running from what it meant, who'd sat across from a sophisticated predator and torn up his contract in front of him, who stood in a library and cried in a way she'd hoped he wouldn't notice, and who had just said, plainly and without performance, the thing that both of them had been building toward for a year. I know, he said. She blinked. I've known for a while, he said. I was waiting for you to know it too. She stared at him for a moment, then, that is the most infuriating thing anyone has ever said to me. Probably. And also, she stopped. The thing that came before a smile became the smile. And also completely consistent with who you are, which is why I can't even be properly annoyed about it. He took one step, and she didn't move back, and the space between them closed in the unhurried way of two people who have been moving toward each other for a long time and have finally run out of reasons to be patient about it. He put his hands on either side of her face, and she leaned into that, and he kissed her the way you do something you've been thinking about long enough that there's no performance left in it, just the thing itself. It wasn't smooth. Her nose bumped his cheek at the start, and they adjusted, and she laughed a little against his mouth, quiet and real, and then it was right. It was very right. When they stepped back from each other, she looked at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. Unguarded in a way that wasn't frightened, open in a way that wasn't vulnerable. Just present. Just her, without the management. Okay, she said, for the third time with the third meaning. Okay, he agreed. Welcome. He went to his truck and came back with two things. The first was the framed photograph. He handed it to her on the porch without preface, and she took the brown paper off carefully and held it for a long time, looking at it, and he let her. She traced the edge of the frame once with one finger. She didn't say anything, and he understood that she didn't need to, that some things don't get improved by words. She carried it inside, set it on the mantelpiece in the parlor, leaning against the wall where a proper hook would go once she'd decided exactly where she wanted it. She stepped back and looked at it in the room. That's where they should have ended up, she said quietly. Together. Here. They got here eventually, Logan said. Just took a generation. She looked at him sideways. That's almost poetic. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation. She almost laughed, which was better than a laugh. The second thing from the truck was a call to Ellie. He'd left her at home that morning with his neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who was reliable and fond of Ellie and could be counted on not to let her eat only cereal for 3 hours. But he'd told Ellie the night before, when I call, be ready. And Ellie, who had absorbed the significance of this particular Saturday without being told the specifics, had nodded with the gravity of a child who understands that certain mornings are important for reasons adults don't always fully explain. He called at 9:45. Ellie picked up on the first ring. "Ready?" she said. "Mrs. Patterson can drive you?" "She already has her keys." A pause. "Is the house done?" "Almost." "Almost how?" "There's one thing left. You'll see when you get here." He heard Ellie relay this to Mrs. Patterson in the background, and the sound of a coat being grabbed, and the door. 30 minutes later, Mrs. Patterson's Subaru came up the gravel drive. Ellie got out with her backpack, which she was clutching with both arms in a way that meant the thing inside it mattered. She looked at the house, the whole front of it, the way you look at something you want to remember. And then she looked at Victoria standing on the porch, and she said, with a directness that made Mrs. Patterson pretend to find something interesting in her rear-view mirror, "You're happy." Victoria looked at her. "Yes. Both of you." "Yes," Logan said from the doorway. Ellie considered this for a moment, the way she considered things. Then she nodded, satisfied, and came up the porch steps. She unzipped the backpack carefully. Inside, wrapped in a piece of flannel that Logan recognized as the remnant from an old shirt of his, were 2 small carved birds. She held one in each palm and looked at them for a moment. The critical, unsentimental look of a craftsperson checking her work. They were wrens. Small, compact, wings folded close to the body. Not perfect. One had a slight asymmetry in the tail that listed slightly left, and the other had a rough spot near the head where she'd corrected a gouge, but real. Present. The kind of imperfect that is more interesting than perfect because it's honest. She'd been working on them since October, he realized. Since before he and Victoria had said anything out loud. Since before the arrest and the retraction and the morning on the porch when the distance between them had finally closed. Ellie had looked at the 2 of them and done her analysis and started carving. She held one out to Victoria. "This one's yours." Victoria took it with both hands. She looked at it for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were doing the thing that Logan had pretended not to notice in the library, and this time he pretended not to notice again because it was the right thing to do. "She's been working on those since October," Logan said quietly. "I know what I see," Ellie said without apology. She handed the second bird to Logan. "And that one's yours. They're supposed to be together. That's why I made 2. Victoria looked at Ellie. "Did you make them the same?" "Almost." Ellie pointed to the slight tilt in the tail of Victoria's bird. "Hers lists a little, and yours has that rough patch," she said to Logan. "I thought about fixing them, but then I thought, things that have been worked on show it. That's not bad. That's just honest." Logan looked at his daughter. 8 years old, standing on the porch of a house she'd watched him restore for a year, having understood something about the people in front of her that neither of them had managed to say cleanly. He thought about what he'd told her months ago, standing in the half-finished kitchen watching her read a level. You can tell a lot about a structure by the single moment it shifts. He thought about the antique store. He thought about blueprints and the absence of them, and what it meant to build something when you didn't know yet what it was going to be. He thought about his mother in a photograph from 1981, laughing on this porch with a woman named Clara Sterling, both of them young and hopeful and full of plans. He thought about the way things wait, the way houses wait, the way people wait sometimes without knowing they're waiting until the right person arrives and says without saying it, "This is what you've been building toward. This right here." "Can we go inside?" Ellie asked. "I want to see the library." "Yeah," Logan said. "We can go inside." They spent 2 hours in the house that morning. Ellie made a systematic inspection of every room, which she conducted with the thoroughness of someone who had watched the renovation from the beginning and wanted to verify that it had been completed to her standards. She approved of the library. She approved of the kitchen counters, running her hand along the soapstone the way Logan had taught her to check surfaces. She sat on the bottom stair of the restored staircase and looked up through the balustrade at the light coming from the upper landing and said, "That's good," which Logan accepted as the high praise it was. Victoria walked with her, answering her questions about the paint colors, about why the library was blue-green, about whether the fox on the front door had a name. They settled on Edmund, which had been Ellie's suggestion, offered with no explanation. Logan watched them move through the house together. He stood in doorways and let them be in the rooms, and he noticed, with the attention he normally reserved for structural details, how naturally they occupied the same space. How Victoria answered Ellie's questions without condescending and without overperforming, just as herself, the same way she'd been herself the afternoon she'd sat on the porch steps and talked about things that were still becoming. How Ellie looked at Victoria when she thought no one was watching, with the careful love of a child who has learned to be careful about loving people who might not stay, and the beginnings of something less careful, something that was starting to trust. He thought about Ellie's drawing on Ms. Parrish's laptop, the two figures in the doorway. V. He thought about the things children understand before adults admit them. At 11 o'clock, Victoria made coffee in the kitchen, real coffee, from the machine she'd brought, and set on the soapstone counter. And the three of them stood in the finished kitchen and drank it. Ellie with the hot chocolate Logan had brought in a thermos, and nobody said anything particularly significant. That was the thing that he kept coming back to, later, when he thought about that morning. The silence was comfortable. Not the weighted silence of two people managing distance, not the careful silence of people who haven't yet figured out what they are to each other, but the ordinary silence of people who are somewhere they want to be, with people they want to be with, and don't need to fill it with anything. That kind of silence is harder to arrive at than most people realize. He'd spent years in silence that wasn't comfortable. He understood the difference. The professional close of the renovation happened the following week. A final walkthrough with Victoria's property manager, a punch list with 3 minor items that took an afternoon to resolve, paperwork and sign-off, and the administrative finality of a completed contract. Logan shook hands with the property manager and drove away from the Caldwell house with the particular mix of feelings that always came at the end of a long job: pride in the work, tiredness in the body, the odd lightness of something finished. He was 4 miles down the road when his phone rang. Victoria. "Your Fox knocker sounds very authoritative," she said. "I knocked with it for the first time this afternoon, and it has real weight." That's the point. Edmund makes a statement. He does. A pause. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what comes next." "For the house?" "For everything." She was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was working through something real. "I don't want to stay in the apartment. I want to live in the house. I've been ready to live in it for months, but I kept telling myself I was waiting for it to be done. And now it's done. And I realized I was actually waiting for something else." Logan drove. The mountains ran along the horizon in the way they always did, indifferent and permanent. "What were you waiting for?" he said. "For it to feel like a home and not just a house. And I think—" She paused. "I think a house becomes a home based on who's in it. Not just who lives there, but who belongs there. Who it's for." Another pause. "I want it to be for us. You and Ellie and me. I know that's not a small thing to say, and I know it doesn't happen on a single Saturday morning, but I wanted to say it out loud before I talked myself into waiting longer." Logan drove for a few seconds without speaking. Through the windshield, the road curved up through the hills in the way it always had. "Ellie's going to want her own space for carving," he said. A pause. "The back porch has good light in the afternoons. She'll want to put things on the walls. The back bedroom has plaster that'll hold a nail. She snores sometimes. I do too. Preston told me it was unladylike, which is one of approximately 8,000 reasons Preston is no longer relevant to my life." Logan almost drove off the road because he was laughing, which was not a thing that happened to him often while driving. He recovered. "Okay," he said. "Okay what?" "Okay, yes, to what you're suggesting." A pause. "Just like that?" "I've been thinking the same thing for months. I was waiting for you to say it first because you needed to say it first." Silence. "You knew again," she said. "I had a strong intuition." "Logan, Victoria, you are—" She stopped. "Never mind. Come for dinner Sunday. Bring Ellie. I'll cook something, or I'll order something, and let's not pretend I'm going to cook, and we'll talk about what actually next looks like. I'll bring dessert. Something good. Always." She hung up. He drove the rest of the way home with the windows down in the December cold, which was objectively a bad idea, and felt exactly right. Mott, there's something nobody tells you about putting a broken thing back together. And I mean really putting it back, not patching the surface and calling it done. The real work, the slow work, the kind where you have to understand what went wrong before you can fix anything, and understanding takes longer than fixing, and the whole process is uncomfortable in a way that doesn't resolve quickly. Nobody tells you that the thing you rebuild isn't the same thing you had before. It can't be. The damage happened. The years happened. The people who walked through it while it was broken left their marks in ways that a renovation can account for but can't erase. What you end up with is something that carries its history honestly. The old fir floors with their repaired sections showing slightly different grain. The plaster walls with the hairline shadows of cracks that were filled and painted, but are still there in the right light. The wood that was never quite as new as the day it was milled, but is more itself for everything it's been through. That's not a flaw. That's the record of the thing having lived. Logan Mercer understood this better than most people, because he worked with it every day. He knew that the houses people valued most were rarely the untouched ones. They were the ones that had been through something and come out the other side with their bones still good. The ones that had been seen clearly, not for what they could become with enough money and enough ambition, but for what they actually were, and loved for that. He'd spent years being careful about what he let himself want, which is its own kind of damage. Not the obvious kind, but not the kind that announces itself as a wound, but the quieter kind, where caution becomes habit, and habit becomes a wall you stop noticing because it's been there so long. He'd called it prudence. He'd called it protecting Ellie. He'd called it a lot of things that weren't entirely wrong, but weren't the whole truth either. The whole truth was that being left by someone you'd built your life around leaves a structural problem you don't always know how to address. You shore up the places that feel weak. You become very competent at managing on your own. And somewhere in the management, you quietly stop expecting that someone might show up who makes the management feel less necessary. Victoria Sterling had shown up. Impractical, private, stubborn about the wrong things, and right about the important ones. Still carrying the marks of a marriage that had cost her more than she'd ever fully say out loud. She'd bought a broken house at an auction she almost left and had the grace, once the right person arrived, to let it be understood properly rather than just sold. He thought about their mothers. Clara Sterling and Rose Mercer, October 1981, standing on the porch of a house they were planning to make something of, neither of them knowing that life would find ways to make the plan impossible. That was not a tidy lesson. It was not a story with a moral that folded cleanly into something useful. Two women who wanted something and lost it and never entirely recovered the version of themselves that had wanted it. That was sad, in the plain and permanent way that some things are sad, and no amount of their children finding each other later could undo it. But Logan thought about the root cellar, about the box he'd pulled from behind the shelving unit that had been waiting there through decades of other people's lives, a manila envelope gone soft with age, holding 3 photographs like they were worth keeping even when no one was looking. He thought about the fact that the house had been sitting all those years with those photographs inside it, holding them without knowing why. The way places sometimes hold things without knowing why, until the right person arrives to understand what they mean. Maybe some things pass forward rather than backward. Maybe the version of the dream that Rose and Clara couldn't complete became something their children could reach. Not the same dream, something different, something that grew from the same ground. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's more than enough. He thought it was. He wasn't a man who believed in neat resolutions. He'd torn out enough rotted foundations to know that the neat version of a story was almost never the true version. The true version had the difficult weeks and the things said wrong and the long silences that had weight to them and the moment on an apartment couch when she'd asked, "Do you?" and he'd said yes, and the whole room changed. The true version had Ellie's birds with their honest asymmetry and the cold coffee on the porch steps and the tear in the contract that lived now in the pocket of a dark coat hanging inside a door with a fox on it. The true version had Edmund, who made a statement. The true version had a library with a deep blue-green wall and a photograph on a parlor mantelpiece of 2 young women laughing at something outside the frame. And it had a porch where an 8-year-old had carved her way through 6 weeks of scraps into something real. And it had a man who built things standing in a doorway he'd rebuilt from the sash. Up looking at a woman who had just said, "I love you," without flinching. None of that was smooth. None of it had arrived on schedule. Most of it had been uncomfortable in the specific way that real things are uncomfortable. Present, demanding, impossible to manage from a safe distance. But there was Ellie, on the back porch of a house that was becoming a home, setting up her carving station in the afternoon light, already planning something new. There was Victoria in the kitchen, learning that the soapstone counter needed to be wiped with a dry cloth and not a wet one, finding this out the hard way, laughing at herself about it. There was Logan, in the doorway between the two rooms, watching both of them, holding a coffee cup that was actually warm for once. There was a family, imperfect, arrived at sideways, made of mismatched parts that had each been through their own damage and come out the other side still good in the bones. There was a house that had waited 40 years to be finished, and two people who had figured out, in the way people figure things out when they're finally paying attention, that finishing it was only the beginning. That was the story. Not clean, not smooth, not the version where everyone knew what they were building at the start. Just real. Just true. Just a family standing in a doorway they'd made together in a house that had held on long enough for them to arrive. That is enough. That is everything.